Hey everybody, my name is John DiPietro and welcome to another edition of Salisbury 500, where we meet with interesting people that I've gotten to become acquainted with in my 50-plus year, I know it's impossible to believe, 50-plus year relationship with Assumption College. Oh, stop! Assumption University, excuse me. So all of a sudden, our degree is worth a lot more. As I said before, I should tell you that this broadcast is not sponsored by Assumption, sanctioned by Assumption, and Assumption might not even know about it. However, let's show them how many people are interested in this type of thing, because right down in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen is a little button that says subscribe, a little red button. So hit that subscribe button. Then right next to that, there's a little bell that is there as well. Hit the bell so that whenever we get a new edition of Salisbury 500, you'll be the first to know about it. So with that being said, let me introduce our guest for today. I should say, when I was a freshman at Assumption, he was a senior, and he was a guy that I looked up to quite heavily. His name is Joe Biedrzycki. And Joe, that's just a joke about you being the senior when I was a freshman.
I was going to say, that's not true, or my math is way off.
Your math is way off.
You're definitely older than I am, right?
Yeah.
You were the class of what, 26, 27?
Yeah, 1826. In fact, we were there 80 years before the college was founded in 19.
There you go.
So, Joe, tell us what you're up to now. I think you graduated in what, 73, 4, or 5?
75.
Okay.
Which is now 45 years ago.
Oh, that's right. And
I did not get a chance to go back for a reunion weekend this year because, of course, it was all done virtually.
Right.
But what I'm doing now is sitting in a home studio that I have recently just moved to Chester, New Hampshire. I've been working at home for about 5 or 6 years after going through 3 iterations of what is called Studio B digital audio, which was the only way I could find to legitimize what I was trying to do to make a living after radio broadcasting.
Okay. And we should say on the radio part that when we were at Assumption in Alumni Hall, staying up late at night and had the radio blaring, you were the guy at the radio station playing that blaring music. Tell us about that, an interesting start that you got in that career.
Very likely. Yeah, most of the people who watch this, and even those who went to Assumption, are probably completely unaware of WACR 89.3 FM.
As Roger Chicchese would call it, all confusion radio.
Well, it was that too, and Wonderful Whacker was its nickname.
Wonderful.
I meant to bring as a prop to show you, I have one of the only matchbooks that says WACR on it in existence anymore, I think.
Matchbook? Yeah.
It's part of my collection.
Not Matchbook 50.
No, just matchbooks. Still has matches in it. You never know when you're going to need a light, you know?
Right, exactly.
I want to say also, based on your introduction, the bottom right-hand button in my screen says leave. So I won't touch that one.
Okay. That's So, Joe, because you spent so much time in radio, people get to see your face. And my guess is that a lot of people are just going to look away from the screen and listen to your voice.
That's their option, I guess. Isn't there a way they can mute my video? I know I can and you can, but I don't think they get that option, can they?
You know, all the years I spent in the radio business, when I would, I was pretty much on the sales side. I would give clients a tour of the studios, and where the air talent was, I would bring it in, and I knew these guys pretty well. And I say guys because then it was pretty much all guys. It was a couple of women. Did you work with Patty Geyer at all? Was she there when you were there?
I did indeed. Yep.
So she came from hard rock AAF up to beautiful music SRS.
Yep.
Years later, but you'd bring them around the studios and you'd say, this is so-and-so, now you know why they're on the radio.
So you and I are classic cases of the old phrase, you have a great face for radio.
Exactly. And we're proving it today.
Now I have defeated that late in my career, in that for the last 35 or 37 years, I have volunteered to New Hampshire Public Television, now known as New Hampshire PBS, as an on-camera auctioneer. So once a year, I do live TV here in New Hampshire, and it's a thrill. And people can't turn out my picture then.
And I'm told that you're doing that live TV in New Hampshire with the guy who hired you way back at 34 Mechanic Street in Worcester.
Yeah, I'm not actually. Cliff hired me later in life, but you are speaking of Cliff Blake, who was the program director of well, what WAAB became first, which was 14Q.
Yeah.
And then it became WNCR. It had a real identity crisis in the mid-'70s.
For a short time.
And then Cliff and I love to tell this story. Cliff hates it, but this is a sample of what it is to be a radio gypsy. Cliff and I parted company in 1979, and I did not see him or hear from him in 12 years. He went off to 6 different markets in those 12 years and had 6 different jobs in radio. He was in pursuit of the ultimate radio gig. Unfortunately, I'm sorry to say, it cost him his marriage. And the 2-year-old that he left behind was 14 when he came back to town. And at that point, I looked at that and said, I'd like to watch my kids grow up. And as a result, I am one of very few people that I know of who ever made a career out of broadcasting and never left New England. I worked only in Worcester, Manchester, New Hampshire, and Boston.
And is still married to the same person you married.
And I'm still married to the same person I was even back in the college radio days.
Right. So
Connie will tell you that our favorite expression used to be, we would bolt up from the dinner table or leave the dorm room on a moment's notice. And the war cry was always, I got to go to the station. It usually meant that somebody else had done something irreparable there at the time.
Yeah. And you were to get the call.
Mike Toomley and Paul Mathis and I were like the traumatic trio.
Oh, that's so funny.
And we tried to save the day more often than not. So here's a quick WACR story. This defines the state of the art in radio broadcasting at Assumption College in 19. I should point out, I got through Assumption in 3 years, but only because I did my freshman year somewhere else at Elmira College.
Okay.
So I transferred in as a sophomore, and literally there was a poster on the wall that said, "Want to do a radio show?" And it was in Bernie Brochu calligraphy and illustration style.
That's right. He had that.
He had a very distinct lettering style that he used on everything.
Yeah.
And so I went to the first meeting. My sophomore year, I did 1 show a week, which was primarily rock and roll. And I knew very little of what I was doing at the time. I knew nothing about music at the time. I can remember specifically saying, here's a new band from England called The Who.
Who?
Yeah, exactly.
Hey, did you have to bring your own records?
Oh, no. There was a huge record collection encased in something that was known as the Ark. And when we doubled its size, we built a second one the same size, and they were known respectively as the Ark and the Covenant. And we had probably 5,000 to 6,000 titles of albums available to us in the studio.
Okay.
So the second year, I did both a rock show, 1 3-hour block, and a jazz show, a second 3-hour block.
No, a little of each, though, right? But
say that again.
Segue and transition, but you didn't know anything about the music.
Well, no, it was largely trial and error.
Okay.
I mean, I knew enough about music. I should back up and say I am a performing musician. I learned how to play the drums in the 5th grade. I was in junior high band and elementary band and high school band and a couple of garage bands. And my mother was a pianist and the organist at church for my entire life growing up. However, that skill of being able to read and write music and play the piano and any keyboard skipped over me and has settled on 2 of my sons who are professional musicians.
Wow.
And professional percussionists.
And before we go any further, throw out some names of the staff that was with you at the radio station that our Assumption people may.
Well, I already told you the ones I remember best, but you mentioned Roger Chicchese, Paul Mathis and Mike Toomley were kind of the co-station managers.
Oh, okay.
In my second year, I became the production director, which was ominous and somewhat fortuitous, I guess. It led to a whole lot more production than I ever thought I would be involved in.
Ominous and fortuitous. Where did you grab that language? What class was it that?
You remember I was a language major at Assumption, so
okay.
You should be glad I'm still speaking English, because I could break into Russian or French at any moment. Okay. Nobody would understand me, including me. But
well, that's beside the point.
So here's the story I want to tell you about WACR. It ran off the exciter, which is the part of a radio transmitter that makes the rest of the transmitter work. So it's kind of like the on switch of your TV. And it was located inside a closet on the 3rd floor of Alumni Hall. And it was plugged into the light switch in the ceiling. And the antenna was up on the roof. And more often than not, when the maid completed her day's work, she would pull the light switch and we would go off the air. So that's how rudimentary it was. And you could not get it barely up on the hill, let alone off campus at all.
Okay. So we lived on a 2nd floor Alumni. That's why we were probably big fans. We were in the same building as the studio. So, we mentioned that you were a double Greyhound, and you were doing these overnight shifts and then coming back and going to class. Talk about those years.
Oh, yes. And let me just say, double Greyhound has 2 meanings, because both my wife, Connie, and I are graduates of the same class of 75 at Assumption. Okay. And later in life, as a married couple with children, we owned 2 Greyhounds. And we never expected to do that, but 2 retired racing Greyhounds in the same household.
Oh, wow.
And with us there was 4.
So 4, right. Double Greyhounds and double Greyhounds.
So what was your last question?
So you are working overnights at the radio station, then getting out, coming to class.
Okay, so let me make the transition from college radio to professional radio. In the summer between junior and senior year, I got called up to the majors. I had, through most of junior year, hung out at WAAF and made some friends down there, and literally just would go down and watch people do their radio show.
Because you were a junkie.
Because I was a music junkie, and basically, I knew how much fun radio was at the college level.
Yep.
And knowing that someday I would have to get out in the world and make some money, I said to myself, gee, I wonder if you can make any money doing this. So I went and met and talked to the guys who were actually getting paid for it. They weren't making money, but they were getting paid. And then in the middle of that summer, one day, I was out working in the field at a local nursery in Hopkinton, Massachusetts. And the station called my home and asked if I could get up there in a hurry because they wanted me to go on the air at some point. So this is, God bless her soul, the only white lie my mother ever told. She called the nursery, said, Joe's got to come home. We have an emergency, and I need him here right away. And so they came out in the field, they got me, they brought me back to my car in the truck. And now I should point out that in the field, people were listening to WAAF on a portable radio. I left the guys I was working with listening to the station, and an hour later, they heard me coming out of the radio because I had gotten changed, washed up, driven to Worcester, and went on the air. So that was the beginning of what turned out to be 15 out of 20 years on the air as a rock and roll DJ, in, as we call them, the good old days.
And that, as they say, is the rest of the story.
Well, that's only the beginning of the story. You don't have time for the rest of the story.
Okay. So, man, I had a great question, but I forgot it. That happens more frequently than ever before. But I'll go to an alternate question because I was noticing a couple weeks ago I was interviewing Ken Cragen, who was Kenny Rogers' manager and also the manager of Lionel Richie and the guy who put Hands Across America and We Are the World together.
Yep.
And I said to Mr. Cragen, I called him Mr. Cragen. I didn't want to call him Ken then. And I said, you've got a lot.
You actually still have respect for some people?
Well, yeah, but,
only if they're a lot older.
Only, yeah. And you know what? He's 84 and is still going strong. But I said,
he qualifies as Mr. then.
Right. I mean, he said, this is a Grammy Award, this is an Emmy Award, and this is a blah, blah, blah. Now, I noticed that you just happened to put a couple of awards over your left shoulder there.
Oh, no, those are there all the time. I didn't stage this shot at all.
Okay, one is a chalice.
Well, it's not a chalice. It's a loving cup.
Okay.
And while we're talking about WAAF, I can tell you that was given to me at a WAAF Christmas party. And when it was originally presented, it had a feather duster sticking out of it. And the inscription reads, I think it's 1984. No, it couldn't be 84. I wasn't still there then. Maybe like 76. I was at AAF between 74 and 79. But anyway, the inscription reads, to Joe Biedrzycki for helping us to keep looking as good as we sound. So there was another guy, Paul Lemieux, who were obsessive about working in a clean studio because everybody else would, trash it. There'd be cigarette butts and empty coffee cups and hunks of paper all over the place. You'd walk in,
coffee cups.
It was like walking into your kid's room.
Right.
But we would clean it up and do our own show and then clean it up again at the end of our show for the next guy. So that's what that's from.
Okay.
And next to that is a book I just procured from Publishers Clearinghouse, hoping to win the big bucks money at my door. And it's called Who Said That? And it's kind of a...
well, it's a book. It looks like a trophy here, Joe.
It's kind of a parody of Bartlett's familiar quotations. It's Bartlett's unfamiliar quotations.
Okay.
Anyway.
Let me stop for a question. Did you ever buy any records where they say, send in a penny and we'll give you 42 albums as long as you buy one a week for the next 80 years? Did you ever?
Once I started in radio, John, nobody I lived with would ever let me even bring another record into the house. And I think I told you part of this story. So in the good old days of 1974, 5, 6, 7, 8, the way radio worked was that all the guys on the air and the girls on the air got boxes of records in the mail for free from all the major labels every week.
Yeah.
You'd get a box of jazz, you'd get a box of rock, you get a box of classical, you get a box of show tunes, whatever. And we had the latitude to be able to take that stuff home and listen to it. And then if we liked something, bring it in and play it on our show and say, hey, here's something you may want to go out and buy. And when 500,000 people bought it, it became a gold record. And when 1 million people bought it, it became a platinum record. These days, it doesn't work like that anymore. Nothing even gets on the air until it's a gold record.
Right.
And it's proven by critical acclaim to be popular.
Did they ever send you a Cadillac, a trip, a new house, or anything?
No, this was beyond the days of true payola.
Payola is a word that, you know what? A lot of people today do not even know what it exists. And another thing, Joe, if we have a recent graduate of Assumption watching this, they're not going to know what an album was.
Well, that's true.
So,
I should have brought you some of those. I happen to have 3,700 of them down in the living room.
Right. You can use them as. So if you have all those albums down there, you don't have a cable table down there, do you?
A turntable? Sure, I do.
Cable table, the tables that you made out of those cable spools.
Oh, no.
These
are all on the records themselves are on custom-made, very heavy wood shelves that my father-in-law created for me.
Okay.
Having just moved the entire collection, I recalculated its mass because I had to pack 32 boxes, each with 104 discs that weighed 56 pounds apiece. So that's 1,800 pounds. And I figure the shelves themselves are about 200 pounds. So okay. I own a ton of music.
A ton of music, yeah, exactly right. So let's fast forward to today. Let's put that 33 record on 78 and fast forward to today.
Oh, but there's 35 years of great stories in between here and there.
Oh, exactly right.
You're going to have me back.
Exactly.
Can I become a season regular?
Yeah, exactly. So let me ask you this: having been a media professional, and when you look at the media,
don't put that in the past tense. I hope I still am.
Yeah. Well, I
try to be every day.
What's your view?
See, I got the shirt to prove it.
Yeah. What's it say?
Studio B Digital Audio.
There you go.
That's the answer to your next question.
Yeah. Okay. We'll play Jeopardy and go back and find a question to fit that answer. Your view of the media today, as far as providing facts versus let's go to TV. Okay. It used to be if you had CBS, ABC, or NBC, whether it was Chet and Dave, or or Walter Cronkite, or who was the guy on it, Peter Jennings, or any of those, they gave you the facts.
Those were true newsmen.
And you had to figure out what side of the facts you want to stand on and listen to. Today, it seems as though, well, let's look at it from a concert perspective. If you've ever gone to a concert and really enjoyed it, and then read the review in the local paper a couple days later, and you say, was I at the same show?
Right.
Your view of the media today, as far as how they present facts versus opinions.
Well, that's
regardless of what side
because
of the coin.
I, like so many of the public, view very narrow stations or networks or channels that I agree with. So I guess the answer I was going to give you is that broadcasting in general and news communications specifically went through a transition from what was truly broadcasting, and that this was true of radio too, when we were just sending out what we thought the masses liked and would listen to. Now, radio was always formatted because you have to remember that stations like AAF and BCN and HCN in Hartford and NEW in New York and other stations across the country as it came east from San Francisco in the late 60s, many of those stations played classical music in their early days. All of these bastions of what is now called classic rock and roll. And I should point out that, I mean, what we were playing then is what's called classic rock and roll now. It wasn't classic rock and roll then. It was
new.
Brand new. So, not to date myself, but
not at all.
Most of these guys who are still playing it and celebrating their 70th and 75th birthdays were young kids at the time.
Yeah.
As were we. I mean, I was only 21, 22 when I went on the air originally. And now I'm 37. So
that's right. You were
so the point I'm making is that along came cable, and it went from broadcasting to narrowcasting, and every station became a specialist. And that's why now, especially, you have so many channels who do one thing. And if you do any kind of streaming of video, I don't watch any broadcast anymore. We get it all over the internet. And there's a great channel called Pluto, which is in itself 57 different streams. And one of them is just stupid people falling down. And one of them is called Incredible People. And it's people pulling off stunts that do work, the kind of stuff that YouTube has become. There's one that's it used to be called the Conspiracy Channel. Actually, they changed it to the Paranormal Channel. But it's all about all the big mysteries of our lives, you know, who killed Kennedy and are there really UFOs and that kind of stuff.
Now the Conspiracy Channel is CNN.
Well, that could be too. So my point now is that in answer to your question about news, it depends on where your interests and your political views lie. So most Republicans watch Fox and agree with everything they say that builds up the current administration. Most people who are on the other side of that argument watch MSNBC and applaud the people there who say exactly what they feel and think about our dear president. And there are other flavors of news and other flavors of broadcasting accordingly.
Okay. So, Joe, let me stop you for a second.
Go ahead.
If your opinion is that people watch only what they like, or agree with, I should say, then how are they ever able to get the other side to see if their current belief is not really real or not the best? If you're only listening to what you want to listen to, how do you form your best opinion?
Have you seen the news lately, John? There's riots in the streets. That's how you know what else is going on. That's how you know that people don't agree with your viewpoint. It's sad but true, but that's the best answer I can come up with to that question. Yep. I don't know of any way. I mean, people who run these stations do incredible, expensive amounts of promotion, but it doesn't do them any good if people don't have the affinity to go there in the first place.
Yeah, exactly. Well, let's go back to funner times, Joe. The most famous celebrity you've had a chance to meet in your radio days.
The most famous. That's a hard one, and I'll preamble it by saying we were very fortunate because we had access. Okay. Especially all the time I was at AAF, and when I came to New Hampshire to run Rock 101 as a program director, I created access. But in those days, the 70s and 80s, when rock artists or any musicians, as you know from having worked with Kenny Rogers, when they were coming around to either promote an album or to put on a concert, they made themselves available to the local radio stations.
Yep.
And so we were able to have a lot of them in as what we called the guest DJ, which meant that basically they came in and sat down and played the music they wanted to hear for the 2 hours or however long they spent with us. And we just pushed the buttons and would try to sneak in a few questions here and there and turn it into an interview. And so I have some great tapes of times on the air with people like Greg Lake I sat on the tour bus of Emerson, Lake and Palmer. I sat on the tour bus with Ann and Nancy Wilson of Heart one night after a show and interviewed them. I met Chris Squire of Yes after a show backstage. I became friendly with Brad Delp, the late Brad Delp, the lead singer of Boston, and was able to attend several of his birthday parties and a couple of pirate rock and roll concert download parties that he hosted. And so the most fun story, or the one that is the most complete circle, is I was sitting at AAF doing my morning show between 10 and 2 one Monday, pretty Mondayed out, as we used to say. It had been a long weekend of whatever, rock and roll warriorship. And the studio door swung open and the program director said, "Hey, Joe, this is Dennis Wilson of the Beach Boys. He's going to do your show with you for the next couple of hours." And I went, "Okay, come on in, Dennis. That takes the pressure off me. You can decide what we're going to play." So Dennis Wilson came in and sat down and played music, and we talked, and he was very gracious and had a great time. The most embarrassing part of the whole show was that as he was getting ready to go, I said, "What tune do you want to hear?" And he said, "Good Vibrations. I want to go get in the limo and hear that as I drive away." Well, for the life of me, throughout the entire radio station, I could not find a copy of Good Vibrations. So here I am backpedaling and playing other Beach Boys songs with apologies to this guy who's just sat with me for 2 hours and specifically in person requested this tune.
And was AAF playing the Beach Boys at the time?
Oh, yeah. Well, it didn't matter. When these guys came in, you played what they wanted to play. So
it was during probably those psychedelic years before.
But no. It was a very broad spectrum of contemporary rock and roll between 75 and 85. And then it got more narrow casting, to use the term I just did. And it went to a much heavier rock and roll. And that is where it stayed throughout its 50-year tenure until it just recently went black.
Yeah. So Dennis Wilson,
Dennis Wilson. So later that same day, I'm going to meet some friends at a little club in Kenmore Square known as the Rathskeller, or the Rat to its friends.
Yep.
And I'm standing at the front door talking to the owner and some of my friends, and a limo pulls up, and who gets out but Dennis Wilson? So I went over and said, "Hey, Dennis, how you doing? Fancy meeting you here." And I made big points with all my friends in the club that night, walking around with a Beach Boy on my arms, introducing him to everybody. Well, Jim Harold, the owner of the club, gave Dennis anything he wanted that night, including way too much alcohol. And they poured Dennis into a limousine, and I said goodbye, and that was the last anybody ever saw of him because 6 months later he drowned.
Wow.
But that was certainly one of the most famous people, the most prominent rock stars that I ever worked with or knew.
My follow-up to that is the nicest, maybe not the biggest name, but the nicest person that you'd say, you know what, this person's a really nice person.
Well, Phil Collins, twice I had the opportunity to work with him. One day in late 70s, I'm going to say 76 or 7 maybe. I don't remember still how this got set up, but I had Phil Collins, Tony Banks, and Mike Rutherford, the 3 remaining members of Genesis, to myself in a hotel suite with tape running for an afternoon. That was right when Peter Gabriel had left the band, and the album was called And Then There Were 3. And so I spent time with all 3 of them, and a lot of that interview was cut up and put into a radio show. I was working for a company at the time that was producing syndicated radio shows. So fast forward 20 years and working for this same guy in a different iteration of his business. Now we are recording concerts and releasing them as syndicated radio shows to 200 or 300 radio stations nationwide, which was similar to the work I had done in the early to mid 70s for the London Wavelength Company, which was distributed by the BBC. And for a couple of years, I was the American voice of the BBC Rock Hour. And a guy named Brian Matthew did all the work for the British recordings. You know, we were the guy who said, "Good evening. Tonight, live from Paducah, it's Genesis, brought to you by Clairol." So anyway, fast forward, and now we're going to record Genesis. So we rented the Record Plant Mobile Recording Studio, which is a huge recording studio in the back of a truck. It came to Boston. We recorded Phil Collins's solo show there, and then flew with the band on commercial airlines down to Washington, D.C., and recorded a second concert there, and then merged the two shows into one radio program.
Now, was that Boston concert actually in Boston, or was it at the Centrum in Worcester?
No. It was in Boston.
In Boston.
I think it was at the Orpheum.
Oh, okay.
I don't remember exactly, but it was in one of the Boston theaters.
Yep.
It was not at what was then the Boston Garden.
Yep. The old garden.
But that incident was, sitting in the airport on the Group W bench next to the band, waiting for the flight that got delayed. And at that point, I realized that most of those guys were just regular people who were really talented. Nobody was ever really an a-hole to me in any interview situation. I would have to say Chris Squire got the worst marks for good behavior, but he was exhausted. He had just played for 2.5 hours. And the last thing in the world he wanted to do was sit and talk to some radio jamoke.
Yeah, especially after the show.
Yep.
They're usually, especially drummers, they just get, they're spent after a show. I mean, did your drumming background or musician background help you out at all when you're interviewing musicians? Because you've been through this.
No, I mean, I did a lot of research. At one point, I owned every copy of Rolling Stone magazine that had been published between 1972 and 1985.
Wow.
It all got wet in a flooded basement one day and became so much paper mache that my wife said, "Joe, that's why they have libraries. Throw that stuff out.
Get that out of here." And you said, like a good husband.
Reluctantly, I kind of had to because it started to stink.
So, Joe, we are way over the normal time.
Oh, I knew that.
No,
I
way
wasn't gonna tell you
over.
it was time.
But you know what? Let's do this. There's so much that we haven't talked about. We want to talk about the years at Classic Hits 100.7?
Yeah, I never even ended that story. But that story comes from what you asked me about a half an hour ago about Cliff Blake. So Cliff did hire me at WZLX when I first went to work in the major market of Boston. But we can save that story if you want it amplified.
Yeah, let's tease that for the next time. Folks, when we come back with Joe, which we don't know when, he's going to tell us about life in Boston radio. And what he's doing right now. We're going to talk about social media. We're going to talk about a whole bunch of things like that. And you know what? If there's another former Greyhound classmate of yours at Assumption that you think is worth talking with and other people would have an interest in, just like I know the many people that are going to have an interest in this story with Joe, just email me. And we'll be happy to track them down and get them on the show. So this
John
is
will save you a seat in front of the duck pond for the next recording.
Exactly. So, Joe, get us out of this.
And that's this edition of Salisbury 500. He's John DiPietro. I'm Joe Biedrzycki, and we hope you know who you are. Thanks for watching.